And can you believe it? This Thursday is Thanksgiving Day. This is a day of celebration where the whole family comes together and enjoys an awesome meal. And then the day is topped off by watching the Dallas Cowboys win another football game. How about them Cowboys? This particular year, they're playing a semi-pro team from Washington. Should be no contest because nobody in Washington knows what they're doing anyway. But at any rate, Thanksgiving has always been one of my favorite holidays. I saw this on one of these humorous pop-up emails that you get from time to time. It said, Thanksgiving is all about getting your entire dysfunctional family under one roof and hoping that the police don't get called. You know, we chuckle at that because sometimes it's all too true. Adrian Rogers highlighted the problem this way. He said, we buy things we do not need with money we do not have to impress people we do not like. Amen. You know, we might call that the other side of Thanksgiving. Not every family gathering is a happy occasion. As I thought about that, though, I pondered the words of our text today. In Proverbs 15:15, it says, all the days of the afflicted are bad, but a cheerful heart has a continual feast. Man, I love that last phrase. A cheerful heart has a continual feast. People with a cheerful heart have Thanksgiving 365 days a year. Well, the question is, what is the secret? Well, verses 16 and 17 of our text today, Solomon reveals two qualities that produce the cheerful heart that enjoys a continual feast. These attitudes of the heart, good news is they're all within reach of every one of us because they do not depend on income, they don't position, reputation, education. It doesn't depend on the size of our bank account or any sort of worldly attainment. The least of us may have a continual feast wherever we go if we will take these two verses to heart. The first step to have that continuous feast is to fill your heart with faith. Look at verse 16. He said, better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and turmoil with it. Check out that first word, better. It's better to have a little with the fear of the Lord than to have a lot and have nothing but turmoil because the Lord's not there. Some things are just better than others. Now, Solomon, who, as you know, was the richest man in the world, does not mean to exalt poverty as if it's to be preferred over wealth. Most poor people would love to be wealthy. You know, if given the chance, many of them do work long, hard hours to try and get ahead. So this is not a proverb in praise of living on the edge of financial disaster. But from the beginning of time, there has always been more poor than rich. It's not as if the world's resources are evenly distributed. And no matter how hard and how far the politicians may go to try to redistribute the wealth, there will always be more poor people than rich. This is less of a statement about the way things ought to be than it is a statement about the way things are. And I believe this is what Jesus meant when He said, the poor you will always have with you. Taken out of context, those words seem kind of callous, and they have to be interpreted in the same light as our proverb. And Jesus explains Himself in the last part of that verse when He says, but you will not always have me. Some things matter more than other things. If Jesus is among you, spend time with Him while you can. Then go and feed the poor. Feed your spirit, then feed the hungry. The words of Solomon reminds us that wealth is no panacea. Yes, it's true that money is needed for everything, and it's better to have some money than none at all. Yes, the rich have large houses, nice furnishings, excellent medical insurance. They have protection against many troubles. But death comes to the rich just like it does to the poor. The rich get cancer and die. The rich divorce. The rich have problems with their children. Because you see, wealth only provides a limited protection in this world. Wealth cannot compensate for the breakup of a marriage, for children in jail, for sudden death. I read once about a wealthy man whose son died in a plane crash. And speaking of it later, he said, once you lose your son, you find out there is no such thing as serious money. Life and death are serious. Money is not. If we have to choose between wealth and the fear of the Lord, let us always choose the latter. In point of fact, most of us don't get that choice. The vast majority of the world will never be wealthy. But we can all fear the Lord. There's another way of looking at it too. Wealth, by definition, is a relative term. Jamie and I live in a 4-bedroom house with a large yard with an invisible fence so Toby won't run away. We have 2 cars parked in the driveway. As I study and prepare messages up in the study in my house, I can hear music playing on the radio and on the stereo in the living room while she's preparing a meal in the kitchen. We have a stereo system, we have TVs, we have computers, we have cell phones, we have tablets, we have a house full of furniture, we have a pantry full of food and closets full of clothes, plus some personal items. If a time ever comes to move, we won't need a huge truck. We'll need a whole fleet of them. You know? And I'm beginning to think, most people go through something like that. You work and you save and you buy and you invest and you build and you decorate and then you store the excess. But as life rolls on, you find out some of the things you couldn't do without years ago, you can easily do without now. They just don't seem to matter very much anymore. I find myself asking all the time, what do we have that we could do without? And if I haven't picked up a book and read it in 20 years, odds are great I'm not going to read it in the next 20 years either. Imagine the people, though, that we see on TV, living in India and in the slums in conditions that defy all human imagination. In India, there are millions of men and women and boys and girls who live in circumstances of such grinding poverty that it almost numbs the mind. There are places where people live in cardboard boxes, under bridges, not a few, but thousands upon thousands side by side. And the narrator on the documentary said that 10 men may share the same tiny space, sleeping in shifts while the others go to work. The men and women who live like that hardly worry about what to take with them when they move. They own the clothes on their back and probably nothing else. Compared to them, I'm a wealthy man. Compared to Jeff Bezos, I'm in dire poverty. Wealth is a relative term. Yes, it is nice to live with a roof over your head, with food on your table, with money in the bank, but it is better, far better, to live with the fear of the Lord in your heart. Now, one need not feel sorry for having more than someone else. But what a fool I am if I think I somehow deserve what I have, or that somehow I'm better than someone who doesn't have as much as I do. What do I have that I didn't receive from God? It's all a gift from God. And that includes everything, every drink of clean water, every bit of electricity that powers my house, every book I read, every shirt that I wear, every bowl of soup that's put before me. Solomon didn't ask and was not saying that those who have more need to feel guilty about what they have. After all, even in the slums, some have more and some have less. Look around. Someone will always be ahead of you. Someone will always be behind you. And there are many others who are going to be right next to you wherever you are. But not everything is equal. Better to live in poverty and know the Lord than to be the richest man in the world and think you did it all by yourself. The rich man eventually discovers that his riches take wings and fly away. If he doesn't discover it in this life, he'll discover it when he dies, because everything he worked for, he gets left behind. I'm reminded of the story of the elderly man. He knew he was approaching the end of his life. Death was imminent. He was an extremely rich man, so he decided in his last days he would go liquefy everything that he owned so he could pack it all in suitcases and take it with him. So that's what he did. He liquefied all of his estate. He put it in suitcases, took 7 suitcases to hold all the money, and he put it up in the attic. Sure enough, not long after that, he died. And after the funeral, the family was gathered together at Grandpa's house to have a meal together. And all of a sudden, one of the grandchildren remembered the money. The money! And everybody just all of a sudden took off, running up the stairs. And they got all the way up the flights of stairs, got all the way to the attic, opened up the door, and every one of them's mouth dropped wide open because all 7 of the suitcases were still there. The grandson Doug just dropped his head. I reckon Grandpa should have put it in the basement. You can't take it with you. So in that respect, we all come in and we all go out the same way. The lesson is clear. Most of us will never be truly rich by the world's standards, but we can all be rich in faith, rich in love, and rich in the knowledge of our God. Proverbs 10:22 says, "It is the blessings of the Lord that makes you rich, and He adds no sorrows to it." J.I. Packer tells of an acquaintance whose career derailed because of his evangelical convictions. When asked if he harbored any ill feelings, that man replied quite simply, "I have known God, and they haven't." Packer goes on to note that most of us wouldn't feel comfortable speaking out in such straightforward terms, but those terms are entirely biblical. Knowing God does make a difference, and it is the defining characteristic of those who follow Jesus Christ. To know God deeply and to know God intimately more than makes up for anything we might lose or not have because of our faith. Writing over 250 years ago, English pastor John Gill summarizes the blessings of the man who fears the Lord this way. Listen to his quote. "For such a man, though he has but little, which is the common portion of good men, yet he does not lack. He has enough and is content. What he has with a blessing, and he enjoys it, and God in it, and has communion with Him. And he also has other bread to eat the world knows nothing of. And particularly, having the fear of the Lord, the eye of God is upon him with pleasure. His heart is toward him and sympathizes with him in all his trouble. His hand communicates unto him both temporal and spiritual meat, which is given to them that fear the Lord. His angels encamp about him. His power protects him. His secrets are with him. And inconceivable and inexpressible goodness is laid up for him." Listen to that one sentence and let it sink in. What he has with a blessing, and he enjoys it. And God is in it and has communion with him. Can the world offer anything better than that? Fill your heart with faith. Second step is to fill your home with love. Look at verse 17. "Better is a dish of vegetables where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it." Here are a few translations of this same verse. "Better a small serving of vegetables with love than a fattened calf with hatred. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fatted calf with hatred. A bowl of vegetables with someone you love is better than a steak with someone you hate. A simple meal with love is better than a feast where there is hatred. It is better to eat a little where there is love than to eat a lot where there is hate." All these verses, in whatever translation you might read it in, all come out at the same place. The most bountiful feast in the world will be ruined if the people at the table hate each other. Discord at the dinner table destroys a good meal, no matter how sumptuous the fare, whether it be prime rib or T-bone steak or turkey and dressing with all of the trimmings. Your cooking may equal what they offer on the food channel, but if your loved ones do not really love each other, what good is all that effort and all that time and all that money? You might as well just skip the meal completely. Now, in this text, the word vegetables just refers to a simple fare that a poor family might share. It might be spinach, it might be collard greens, it might be cabbage. This family is so poor that they're vegetarian by choice. By necessity, not by choice. When they come together, they share nothing but a handful of stewed greens. It's not extravagant, but man, it tastes good because it is served with love. Solomon's not elevating poverty. He's merely reminding us that money doesn't necessarily bring happiness. It certainly doesn't guarantee a happy family or a harmonious Thanksgiving dinner. Now, the point is, we already know all this. We know these things. We don't need Solomon to tell us, because deep down, we know that faith and love matter more than money or fame. And I believe that's one reason why the movie It's a Wonderful Life remains one of the most beloved Christmas movies of all time. You know the movie. When George Bailey, played by Jimmy Stewart, contemplates suicide on Christmas Eve, it takes the help of an angel named Clarence to help him see the difference his life has made. As it happens, 3 of the best lines in the entire movie comes from the angel. The angel tells him, "Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. When he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?" Second statement, "You see, George, you've really had a wonderful life. Don't you see what a mistake it would be just to throw it away?" The third one isn't a spoken line. It's the inscription in a book left for George by the angel as the movie comes to its climax. This is what's written in the book. "Remember, George, no man is a failure who has friends." So if we know all these things, why does Solomon have to remind us? Because we need reminding, that's why. Because we all live under the spell of the big world with its alluring lights, its flashing games, its beautiful people, all the promises of the good life on the other side of the street. You ever stop to wonder, why do powerful, influential, and prominent people seemingly throw all away their common sense, and after a lifetime of brilliant success, to have an affair that's going to be splashed on TV, radio, and across the internet? You know, you stop and think about it, there really isn't one specific answer to that question, except to note that going back as far as King David, powerful men have been tempted by beautiful women who were available to them. And all sorts of foolishness. And all sorts of scandal is the result. It's a long way to realize that they're doing things that they would have sworn to their nth degree they would never do. I'm reminded of a friend who said she used to look with disdain with people who had had an affair until she almost had one. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be a 4-star general or a famous celebrity or a multimillionaire to blow up your life, your career, and your family. Some not so beautiful people have done some amazingly dumb things. One can only hope that all the finger pointing leads to an honest self-examination. Now, it may sound like I've changed the subject, but I really haven't, because all of this is Solomon's subject. Remember, the operative word is better. It's better to enjoy a simple meal where love abounds than to feast at the finest restaurant in Paris, drink the finest wines, and be surrounded by people you can't stand. As the man on the midway of the state fair says, you pays your money and you takes your chances. Thousands of people will read this proverb of Solomon, nod in agreement, and then go right out and blow up their entire family by a round of foolish choices. You see, the point is this simple. We know these things are true, but you don't have to live that way. Choose today whom you will serve. The Bible says, "See, I have set before you today life and death. Choose life that you may live." That's great advice. It was first given by Moses to the children of Israel. But even after all that wandering in the desert, and after a whole generation died, they still made the same dumb mistakes over and over and over again. Lately, in my quiet time, I've been reading the Psalms. When I come to Psalm 78, which partly recounts the early history of Israel, I was struck by the emphasis on how Israel kept messing up. They would be forgiven by God after He judged them. And then they would go out and do it all over again. You can read it for yourself. I'm not exaggerating at all. But God ends up being the real hero of the story. Look at what it says in verses 40 and 41 of Psalm 78. How often they rebelled against Him in the wilderness and grieved Him in the desert. Again and again they tempted God and pained the Holy One of Israel. People who knew what God had said had either forgot, or they didn't care, or they thought they had a better idea, or they just decided to do things their own way. Sound familiar? It never worked out. But then you come to a wonderful verse like this in verse 52. But He led forth His own people like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. That's us. We are God's sheep. And every time you turn around, we're all going to our own way. Left to ourselves, we'll all get lost. Or we'll wander back to Egypt. We'll start fighting with each other. Or we'll end up as supper for the wolves. We're unruly. We don't like to be led. And sometimes we're just plain dumb. But God leads His sheep all the way through the wilderness by His grace. Eventually, we make it to safety and rest and shelter. God leads us. There is a better way to live, but it depends on us believing that our shepherd knows what He is doing, even when we think we have a better idea. If we have faith, and if we have love, then we have all that we need at this very moment. I love how Matthew Henry puts it. It is therefore far better and more desirable to have but a little of the world and to have it with a good conscience, to keep up communion with God and enjoy Him in it, and to live by faith than to have the greatest plenty and live without God in the world. You see, Matthew Henry and Solomon agree. Some things are just better than other things. No matter if you have a lot or if you have a little, as long as you have God, you have all that you need. So if you want to have a Thanksgiving continuously in your life, every day of the year, fill your heart with faith and your home with love. Remember, a cheerful heart has a continuous feast. I leave you today with a song written in 1922 by a lady named Rhea Miller. The music was written and made famous by George Beverly Shea. It seems to perfectly capture the deeper meaning of our text. The words go like this: I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold. I'd rather be His than have riches untold. I'd rather have Jesus than houses or lands. I'd rather be led by His nail-pierced hand than to be the king of a vast domain and be held in sin's dread sway. I'd rather have Jesus than anything this world offers today. Maybe we ought to all say those words out loud and let them be our application of this truth. I'd rather have Jesus. How about you? Let's stand. Let's close. And as our benediction, sing this prayer: I'd rather have Jesus.